Hello, in today's video we're going to be taking a look at the new and native Microsoft 365 backup and archive solutions, which at the time of recording are both in public preview. Microsoft 365 Backup aims to protect an organization against accidental or malicious data loss, ransomware attacks, and data security breaches by periodically creating immutable backups across the Microsoft 365 estate, covering solutions such as SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, and Exchange Online. These backups are then made easily recoverable and restorable from within the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, without ever having to leave it. Additionally, the solution also respects geographical residency requirements, as the data never leaves the Microsoft 365 trust boundary or the geographical locations of the tenant's current data residency configuration. Furthermore, if an organization would prefer, they can also leverage this new solution via a third-party service that supports Microsoft's new backup APIs. This is particularly useful for organizations that have a preferred backup provider already, or if they have any non-Microsoft 365 data that also requires backing up. Microsoft 365 Archive, on the other hand, aims to address the issues relating to content growth across Microsoft 365 within services such as SharePoint Online. In line with an organization's organic content growth, it's accepted that the amount of data they withhold will indefinitely expand. But as a consequence of this, the amount of free storage available within SharePoint will subsequently decrease. However, as time progresses, some of this content will naturally become less active and less accessed, meaning that whilst it must be maintained and not deleted, if we can help it, we don't really want it to absorb that valuable storage quota within Microsoft 365. And this is where Microsoft 365 Archive comes into play, by offering a cold storage tier that enables an organization to securely and compliantly store inactive data within SharePoint Online, but at a more cost-effective price that doesn't take away from the standard SharePoint quotas. Using this archive capability, organizations can easily archive but also reactivate content easily and efficiently from within the SharePoint Online interface. Let's start with Microsoft 365 Backup. Before we delve in, it's probably useful that we understand some basic terminology relating to the service. Protection units reflect the supported products for Microsoft 365 Backup. For example, today we have SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, and Exchange Online. Restore point reflects a previous point in time from which an administrator can restore data from, essentially reflecting previous backups. Recovery point objective, or RPO, reflects how close in time the most recent restore point is to an impacting event. As we can see in the screenshot provided by Microsoft, we have the different RPOs depending on when the event took place. Where OneDrive and SharePoint are concerned, if the impacting event has occurred in the last 14 days, you'll have plenty of restore points available every 15 minutes within that period. However, if it has been beyond that, anywhere from 15 to 365 days, your recovery points will go down to 1 per week. Where Exchange Online is concerned, you will have restore points available for every 10 minutes from 0 up until 365 days. Recovery time objective, or RTO, reflects how fast a restore to a prior point in time can occur. Microsoft have provided some example RTOs here. If we had 1000 SharePoint sites with a 30GB average site size, the first full container would restore in less than 1 hour. However, to restore all containers, we were talking less than 12 hours, and the same again for 1000 Exchange Online mailboxes. Let's now take a look at the licensing and pricing model for Microsoft 365 Backup. The pricing and licensing model for Microsoft 365 Backup is based on a pay-as-you-go model, facilitated via Microsoft Syntex. The current cost per unit is listed at 15 cents per gigabyte per month, or if you're in the UK, that's around 12 pence. However, these prices are subject to change when the product reaches general availability. Whilst Microsoft 365 Backup isn't specifically part of the Syntex product suite, it does still leverage the Syntex billing model to ensure consistency with other Microsoft 365 pay-as-you-go offerings. Additionally, if an organization opts to integrate Microsoft 365 Backup with a third-party offering, the vendor may charge a different rate for their service. The first step within the process oversees the initial enablement of the Microsoft 365 Backup service, which also bears witness to the enablement of the Syntex pay-as-you-go billing model, assuming that it hasn't already been configured, which the backup solution relies upon. As a prerequisite, please ensure you have an Azure subscription and encompassing resource group available and ready, as the setup process for the Syntex pay-as-you-go billing model requires them. Here we can see we already have an Azure subscription available, so we just need to create a dedicated resource group. Next, in the Microsoft 365 admin portal, admin.microsoft.com, we're going to click Setup in the left-hand navigation pane. Within the Setup blade, we're going to scroll down until we get to the Files and Content section. Within that section, we're going to click Use Content AI with Microsoft Syntex. If billing hasn't already been set up, we're going to click Set Up Billing. As you can see here, the prerequisites are that we must have at least one Azure subscription that supports pay-as-you-go products and a resource group as well. We're going to select our Azure subscription and then the resource group we created earlier. We'll then choose a region. We'll then review the terms of service and click Accept, and then Save. Once the Syntex pay-as-you-go billing model has been set up, we'll click Manage Microsoft Syntex. We'll then select Backup from the list of products, followed by clicking Turn On. And there we go, Microsoft 365 Backup has been turned on. Now that the service is enabled, let's take a look at configuring the Microsoft 365 Backup solution. Back within the Microsoft 365 admin portal, admin.microsoft.com, we're going to navigate to Settings in the left-hand navigation pane and then click Microsoft 365 Backup. Here we can see the available products that are supported for the backup service. We're going to start with SharePoint Online, so we will click Setup Policy within the SharePoint section. We'll then review the policy attributes such as the backup frequency and backup retention, which we covered earlier in this video. We'll then proceed onto the next section at the protection scope screen. This is where we define which SharePoint sites should be in scope for the backup service. We have a few different options available to do that, such as adding a SharePoint site manually via a search, or we can use a rule to capture multiple sites, such as defining a term that the site name or the URL must contain. And we can also use a rule to determine if a site should be added based on its last modified date. We can also import a group of SharePoint sites from a CSV file. If you are to use the rule mechanism to add SharePoint sites to the backup service, it is worth noting that this is a one-time run only, meaning any sites that match this criteria in the future will not be automatically added. This particular rule that we have selected, called site name or URL contains, can be used for varying purposes. For example, we could use the primary tenant name associated with the SharePoint Online environment to capture all SharePoint sites by default. Here we can see that the primary tenant name is 365 test, so we'll grab that and we'll paste that into the text box. We can then use the view matching sites to see how this rule will behave. And as we can see, all 2 SharePoint sites within the tenant currently have been captured. Remember though, this is a one-time rule, so any further SharePoint sites created in the future will not be added. In this example though, we're going to use the add via search mechanism to manually search and find the finance SharePoint site. Once added, we'll then proceed on to the next step, where we will review and confirm the configuration that we have just walked through. Within the SharePoint section, we can now see that the status has changed from not set up to processing. And if we click the View Details button, we can review the configuration as well as modify it. Next, we're going to set up a policy for Exchange Online. Again, we will review the policy attributes that we discussed earlier in the video, such as the backup frequency and backup retention, and then we'll progress to the protection scope. Again, we have different methods just like SharePoint Online to define the mailboxes that should be put in scope for the backup. We have add via search, where we can manually search for mailboxes. We have add via distribution lists and security groups, where we can add a group of mailboxes depending on their membership to one of those items. And again, we have the import from file, where we can upload a group of mailboxes from a CSV. If you are going to leverage the add via distribution list or security groups mechanism, it is worth noting that again, these are a one-time run only, meaning any future amendments to a list or a group will not automatically update the backup policy. In this example, we're going to use the add via search option, and we're going to search for our test user and their corresponding mailbox. We'll then proceed to the final review and finish screen, where we'll review our configuration and confirm it. And again, we can see that the status has changed from not set up to processing. And again, by clicking view details, we can review and modify the configuration. Now that the service has been enabled and configured, within this next section, we're going to take a look at testing the backup and restore capability of Microsoft 365 Backup. Back within the Microsoft 365 Backup blade, we can see that the statuses for SharePoint and Exchange are both now active. Before we test the backup process, let's get familiar with the context around the scenario. Within SharePoint Online, we have the finance site, which we previously configured for backup. Within that finance site, we have a bit of data. In here, we can see a few folders and a few Excel spreadsheets. To replicate a data loss scenario, we're going to delete this data. Moving on to Exchange Online, we can see here that our test user that we previously backed up has one email within their mailbox. Please notice that this email also has an attachment. Again, we're going to delete this email to replicate a data loss scenario. Back within the Microsoft 365 Backup blade, we're going to click Restore within the SharePoint section. Within there, we'll verify that we're restoring SharePoint site content. We'll then add the site that we want to restore, which in this case will be the finance site. We'll then proceed to the next screen called Date and Time. Here we'll specify a date and time that we would like to restore to. The backup service will then automatically find the closest backup before the specified date and time. We'll then progress onwards to the Confirm Restore Point screen, which is where the service will automatically determine the closest backup and restore point before the date and time we previously configured. If the automatically provided restore point isn't suitable, we can actually select a different backup. Moving on to the destination screen, we can choose to restore the content to the original site, so the finance site, or we can ask the service to create a new site and restore the content there. In this example, we're going to restore the content to the original site. We'll then review and confirm the restore request. Here, still within the Microsoft 365 Backup blade, we now have the Restoration Tasks tab selected. And we can see here the SharePoint site restoration task we just executed with a status of in progress. From here, we'll create a new restoration task, this time for Exchange Online. At the next screen, we'll find and select the mailbox we want to restore. This time we have two different options. We can either restore all emails, notes, contacts, calendars and tasks the same way we did with SharePoint previously by specifying a date and time which we want to restore from, and then the service will automatically choose the closest backup before that time, or we can choose the selected content only option where we can specify a time frame instead, such as content within the last 24 hours. We can also add filters to that criteria too, so we can filter on who the email has been sent from, if the email has an attachment, if the subject has a particular keyword that we can specify, or who the email has been sent to. In this example, if we remember the email that we previously deleted, it had an attachment, so we will use the Has Attachment filter option, which will be configured to yes. We can then use the Find Matching Items to see how many items match that criteria. And as expected, we can see that one item matches the criteria. At the Set Destination screen, we can specify whether we want to restore the content in place from where it was originally backed up from, or if we would like to create a new folder within the mailbox that will be labelled with the appropriate date and timestamp and restore the content there instead. In this example, we'll choose to restore the content in place. Finally, we'll then review the restoration task and then confirm it. And back within the Microsoft 365 Backup Blade within the Restoration Tasks tab, we can now see both restoration tasks in progress. Both restoration tasks have now completed. To prove the concept, we'll navigate back to the SharePoint site, and as we can see, the data that we had previously before deleting it has now been restored successfully. Checking the user's mailbox, again we can see that the email with that attachment that we previously deleted has also restored successfully. Regarding reporting and audit logs, there aren't any official reporting or log locations for Microsoft 365 Backup that I've come across yet. However, there are a few locations you can review for various different purposes. Within the Microsoft 365 Backup Blade, for each supported service, we can click View Details to review the latest activity, such as when the policy was last modified, and by who. If we then navigate to the Restoration Tasks tab, we can also review a log of all the restoration activities that have occurred, including when they happened and who they were created by. During the restoration activities, we notice that the top 3 Exchange admin events were recorded in the unified audit log within the compliance portal. Moving on to Microsoft 365 Archive now, let's take a look at some of the key benefits of the service. Starting with speed. The archiving of sites, regardless of size or amount, is ultra fast as per Microsoft's own wording. Cost savings. The cold storage tier that archive data is moved to is considerably cheaper than procuring additional SharePoint Online storage. Metadata. Archived data will retain all of its metadata and permissions upon reactivation from the archive. Cleansing. Clear separation between active and inactive data helps to declutter the environment whilst helping to manage the life cycle of data. Security. All archived data have the same level of security as active data. Geo-residence. Archived data remains within the configured geo-compliance boundary and residency and complies with the European Union's data boundary promise. Let's now take a look at the licensing and pricing model for Microsoft 365 Archive. Much like Microsoft 365 Backup, the pricing and licensing model for Microsoft 365 Archive is also based on a pay-as-you-go model facilitated via Microsoft Syntex. The current cost per unit depends on the archive activity. Archive consumption reflects the cost associated with the number of gigabytes of data archived. This metric is currently only charged when the amount of archive storage plus active storage in SharePoint Online exceeds the tenant's included SharePoint Online storage quota. This is costed at 5 cents per gigabyte per month, or if you're in the UK, that's about 4 pence. Archive reactivation reflects the cost associated with reactivating and rehydrating archive data back into active data, but only once 7 days have passed after the initial archiving activity. Reactivating data within the initial 7-day grace period is not chargeable. This is costed at 60 cents per gigabyte, or if you're in the UK, this is around 48 pence. These prices are subject to change when the product reaches general availability. Whilst Microsoft 365 Archive isn't specifically part of the Syntex product suite, it does still leverage the Syntex billing model to ensure consistency with other Microsoft 365 pay-as-you-go offerings. The first task for Microsoft 365 Archive is to enable the service, and much like Microsoft 365 Backup, this also bears witness to the enablement of the Syntex pay-as-you-go billing model, again assuming that it hasn't already been configured. As we have already enabled the Microsoft Syntex pay-as-you-go billing model within the Microsoft 365 Backup section of this video, we won't repeat that step here. If you have skipped past that part of the video, you can refer back to the Microsoft 365 Backup enablement section to review how the pay-as-you-go billing model should be set up. Once set up, we will click Manage Microsoft Syntex, and then within the list of products, we'll click Archive, and then we'll click Turn On, and then Confirm. Microsoft 365 Archive is now turned on. Once the solution has been enabled, we can now take a look at managing and testing the archive and reactivation capabilities of Microsoft 365 Archive. Before we start, there are 3 archive states we should be familiar with, the first being recently archived. This state is the first stage after a site is archived and is valid for 7 days. A site in this stage can be reactivated without any cost and will be reactivated instantly. Archived, the site enters this state after 7 days after being archived. In this stage, reactivations will be charged and might take a few hours. Reactivating. If a site is reactivated from archived state, it will be in this stage until reactivation is complete. After this, the site will be active and will appear in active sites. Within the SharePoint Online admin portal, the first thing that we will notice is in the left-hand navigation pane within sites. Usually, we would only have the choice of active sites or deleted sites, but now we have archived sites. In this example, we are going to archive a SharePoint Online site called Finance. We'll open the SharePoint Online site to prove that I have access to it and that there is data within there. To archive this site, back within the SharePoint Online admin portal within active sites, we'll select the site and then click Archive. Within the flyout window pane, we'll review the archive requests and all the information associated with it. For example, we can see here that there is reference to the 7-day grace period, whereby sites can be reactivated within the first 7 days free of charge. Otherwise, after 7 days, the activation fee will apply. Once reviewed and happy, we will click Archive. If we now navigate to archived sites, we can see that the Finance site has now been moved within there with a status of recently archived. If we now try to access the archived site, we'll be greeted with this message, stating that the SharePoint site has been archived by an administrator and an administrator must reactivate it if access is required. Back within the SharePoint Online admin portal within archived sites, we'll now reactivate the Finance SharePoint site we just archived by selecting it and then clicking Reactivate. Within the flyout window pane, we'll review the reactivate action. Here we can see an estimated reactivation fee too, but because this site is within the 7-day grace period, there isn't a charge associated. Once happy, we'll click Reactivate. We can now see that the Finance site has reappeared under active sites, and if we try to access the site, we can again, and all the data has been restored. Regarding reporting and logs for the Microsoft 365 Archive solution, whilst browsing around the Microsoft 365 Unified Audit Log, we have noticed some activities being logged throughout our testing. Within the Microsoft 365 Unified Audit Log within the Compliance portal, we can actually see a few events logged for the archiving and reactivation activities. The previous absence of a native Microsoft 365 backup and Microsoft 365 archive solution has long been questioned by technology professionals and customers alike, but with these questions now being answered, we can only expect that these solutions will be heavily adopted in the coming months and years. And because both of these solutions are currently in their early public preview state, there are a few limitations present. I won't detail them all in this video, but I will provide links in the description. Some notable ones for Microsoft 365 Backup, however, are that only full SharePoint sites and OneDrive accounts can be restored, meaning file level granularity for restoration isn't currently possible, but will be in the future. Currently, SharePoint, OneDrive and Exchange are supported for Microsoft 365 Backup. However, support for Microsoft Teams is coming soon. Only one active backup policy per supported product can be configured currently, but this is expected to increase in the future. And where Microsoft 365 Archive is concerned, only full SharePoint sites can be archived currently, with file level archiving intended for the second half of this year, 2024. Archiving a site that is currently enrolled in Microsoft 365 Backup will be blocked. Just to reiterate though, these are all present day launch limitations. A lot of these will be remediated going forward, so I recommend you keep an eye on the relevant documentation. Okay, so that's everything for this video. As a recap, we've looked at both of the new native Microsoft 365 backup and archive solutions, covering how they can be enabled and how we can manage them on an ongoing basis. I hope you found this video useful, and as always, thank you very much for watching.